everybody, I'm the Lazy Quilter, and today we are getting back to Quilt Basics and we're going to be doing borders. So I've been really looking forward to doing this video because I feel that borders are something that seems like a really easy concept and people do without knowing the proper way to do them. And I didn't really realize this was such a problem in quilting until I started long arming. And long arming really showed me how important borders can be. In our last video, we talked about squaring up and how I kind of discouraged you guys from squaring up your blocks, but rather using your sashing to square everything up. Borders work in the same way. Borders we can use when our quilt top is done, we can pour borders on and actually square up our quilt that way. The two big things that people do that are not correct in quilting is when they're doing their borders, they'll either sew on, it's Sunday, why is my phone ringing? Hold on. Where was I? Okay, so back to, okay, so what people do is they'll take a big long piece of strip that they're going to use for borders and they sew it onto the side and then they cut off the extra. That's not correct. The other thing that they do is they measure the sides. They measure each side and they cut a border to fit that size and they sew it on. That is also not correct. And if you guys have watched my videos, you know that I'm not a very particular sewer. You know, your points don't have to always come out. It doesn't always have to line up. You just got to be, you know, happy with your product. But this is something that you can really easily change and that will really help you get quilt tops that don't wave on the ends. So here's what you do. It's really simple and really easy. When you are measuring for your borders, fold your quilt top in half. Do I have a good example around them? Okay, I'll use these. If you follow me on Instagram, you'll see these posted up. My husband's actually doing these blocks. He's doing a pretty good job. Anyway, if this is your quilt top, what you should be doing is folding this, okay? So we're gonna fold it in half. And we're gonna measure here. So we're measuring the middle. So let's say, I'll measure it right now. This is about 17.5 inches. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut two borders that are 17.5 inches. And I'm gonna sew one on one side, using a 1/4 inch of course, and one on the other. And what that does is it makes the side of your quilt the same size as the middle of your quilt. This is squaring your quilt top. Really easy way to do it. The reason we don't measure the sides is the sides can have open seams where it pulls, okay? We can also have a very big variation between one side to the other. It's pretty common to see a quilt that's 1 inch longer on one side than the other. Maybe even a couple inches. The reason being is when you have a whole quilt, you have a ton of these seams that you've sewn that are supposed to be exactly a 1/4 inch or exactly a scant 1/4 inch. And not a whole lot of us are perfect in every seam. So what we get is variation, or we get stretch in our fabric. Those two things make your sides different sizes. So if you're measuring your sides are most likely longer than your middle. The middle is usually shorter because all of the seams are sewn into other seams, so the stretching is limited. The sides, however, can have open seams where they're not sewn into other seams. Let me explain it this way. There's a reason why we don't backstitch in quilting. We don't need to because we secure all the seams in the middle by sewing them into other seams, okay? So we don't need that back stitching strength. because everything's getting sewn into everything except the edges when we're doing our borders. So these edges are, they're very vulnerable to stretching and pulling apart of their seams. Now, when you sew your sides on, then you can fold it in half and measure this middle and use this middle to cut both of these sides, top and bottom. This is pretty basic borders. This is what's going to save your quilt from being oddly shaped. I see it all the time in long arming. I get a quilt in and the borders have not been put on properly, and what happens is the borders are much longer than the middle, okay? And the middle will be tight or taut, the way it's supposed to be on a frame, and the borders will be very loose, which causes the fabric to fold over. I have a little trick that fixes it on long arm, but that's a very common thing because people don't think about it. They don't think about how much variation can be in their quilt top, and that's normal. It's normal to have this variation. A lot of quilters get upset. They'll measure and they'll be like, oh, this is an inch bigger on one side than the other. That's okay. That happens, and it happens to all of us. But we know that we can square it up using borders, and that's what's going to make it straight. Now, the next thing you're probably wondering is if these two sides are different sizes and I'm sewing the same size border on each side, one of them's going to not fit correctly. And here's what I suggest, okay? If your side is shorter than your border, which very rarely happens, very, very rarely, you can give just a little bit of give in your fabric and kind of work it in. I'm not saying pull the fabric. I wouldn't say that. But just give it a little tug to help it fit. The other thing is if it's too long, you're gonna work your quilt top gently into that border. You're gonna put a little bit of extra of that top every so often as you pin, and you're gonna work it in. You'd be surprised how much you can work into a seam. And that's how you get the same size on both sides, okay? Borders are a big thing. This is probably the most important video I've done so far. So I hope all of you watch it, share it, because we can save so many quilters so much, just sadness when they're putting their borders on and they're having this trouble of a wavy border. Anyway, guys, next week we're going to talk about quilting on our machine, one of my favorite things, and we'll get, we're almost done. Gosh, we've got quilting and binding, and that's it. Anyway, I am the Lazy Quilter. I'm glad you guys came back to watch this video. If you like this video, please please subscribe and check out my other videos on my channel. You can check me out on Instagram and see some more of these cute little animals, and Twitter. I'm on Twitter, Lazy Quilter under all of it, and I'll link it below. I hope you guys have a great week, and I will see you next week.